Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we have a conversation about, well, this is a schmooze day, so I don't know what we're going to have a conversation about, but I was just noticing the fact that this is August the 9th, which is Nagasaki Day. Therefore, we certainly are going to have a moment in which we discuss what's going on in the world of nuclear weapons today and the various threats that we face because of the discovery of this horrible weapon. But then I will expect our guests to say what's on their minds. And two of my guests are here, and I'm expecting a third. In Jerusalem, Israel, is Dina Zisserman Brodsky, who's a political science professor at, tell me the name of your university. And Ben-Gurion University. Yeah. She takes a bus to go to work and teach at Ben-Gurion University, an hour and a half away from Jerusalem, right? We just found that out. And she's an immigrant from Russia. So she and I have been discussing the attitudes of our friends in Moscow, mostly in Moscow, people who have not immigrated to Israel and who have varying points of view about the war. Near Picton, Ontario, on his farm, I presume, is Sam Lanfranco. And Sam is a retired economics professor, York University here in Toronto. And he's also a very engaged member of the ICANN, which is an abbreviation for something having to do with Hello, Mary Lou. I'll get to you in a second. Sam Lanfranco, tell us exactly what this acronym stands for.
ICANN is an organization. It's a multi-stakeholder, not multilateral, international organization responsible for the stability and security of the top level of the internet, the domain name system, how the domain name system works, intellectual property issues around that, security issues around that. It doesn't deal with content. It doesn't deal with the service providers and all of that. But at the same time, we're just emerging these days in the next little while. I'm the president of a newly formed nonprofit organization that's headquartered in the US called the Internet Integrity Task Force. And it's dealing with issues of integrity and trust around all aspects of the internet, policy, processes, practices, behavior. We're taking on a very small task there.
Oh boy. Yeah, do we ever need you? I'm delighted to hear it. Well, and so our third guest has arrived. It's Senator Mary Lou McPhedran, who is incognito behind some dark glasses. Hello, Mary Lou. How are you?
Not trying to be a diva. I actually have a very painful eye infection and I can't stand the light right now. So I didn't want to miss the conversation. So I'm here in dark glasses.
Oh, okay. Well, they're actually very becoming. I'm sure you're making a fashion statement that's going to catch on. And next week we will see everybody on the streets wearing dark glasses like that, right over their black masks.
Right.
It's true. And I also wear a black mask. But I'm not going out right now.
I wear one too when I think about it. Well, anyway, it's very fetching, and I'm glad that you're here. I'm sorry you're in pain. The initial explosion in Los Alamos.
I actually saw one of those.
I saw some explosions too. When would have been 1961, because my son was a tiny baby and I was with my parents in Southern California, and we would go out on the lawn before dawn and watch the explosion in Nevada, which was hundreds of miles away. Yeah, I remember seeing that. I didn't know that. Oh, here comes Adam.
I believe it was 77 years, Hiroshima. And it's
Okay.
Nagasaki Day today, or is it Hiroshima Day?
Is this
It's Nagasaki Day.
It's Nagasaki Day.
Day.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 77
The
years,
second
that
one.
figures, because I remember I was 14 years old. And you know what? To my everlasting remorse, I was glad, you know? Can you imagine? I mean, I was 14 years old. I remember coming home and reading that newspaper and thinking, hooray, we're winning the war with this thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's, been probably half of my motivation ever since, is trying to compensate for the feeling I had at the time,
I think I had the opposite. I mean, I didn't know much about the war, but I ended up majoring in physics and building a cloud chamber out of a wine bottle when I was in high school.
Really. With the idea that you were stimulated by the idea of fission and stuff.
Well, not the bombs, by nuclear energy.
Uh-huh. Well, I don't know. For me, there'll be forever the sense of shame that because my parents, everybody, I wasn't different. No, I didn't know anybody at the time who didn't share my views that this was a wonderful thing. It was going to put an end to, it was going to save our boys, they wouldn't have to invade Japan. And when I think about it now, but everybody had that view, and it would have been probably 4 or 5 years before I heard anybody say that was a wrong thing to do. We shouldn't have done that. But there may have been more people here in Canada, or no doubt there were in Russia, I presume. What did people in Russia think? Do you know, Dina?
Yes, first of all, the atomic bomb was described as the most terrible thing that can happen. And everybody was afraid of nuclear war. And everybody, including at that time, including the members of Russian elite, of Soviet communist elite, didn't want the war and tried to prevent the war.
But it was 2 days later, or 1 day later, that Russia actually entered the war. Remember? Because this treaty was expired. In fact, Ward Wilson, among other people, has argued, I think convincingly, that it wasn't the atomic bomb that ended the war. It was the fact that Russia entered the war. And
yes, in Putin's time, the perceptions of the nuclear war has changed dramatically. Now, the Russian propaganda is trying to promote the notion, or promote the conception that in nuclear war can be the winner, and Russia can win the nuclear wars. I guess that the high military officers indeed understand the dangerous game of Putin, and the nuclear and the atomic bomb won't be used, but you cannot guarantee that.
I know. Yeah. I just had a conversation with Michael McFaul the other day, the former Russian U.S. ambassador to Russia. And the first question I asked him is, who can stop Putin if he decides he wants to use it? And basically he said, nobody. Anyway, Mary Lou, you've been in, was it Vienna where the TPNW meeting was held? That's where we spoke last. You were in the meeting, right? Tell us, is there anything to report from as the outcome of that meeting? What
Isn't a conflict between the 50-year-old Treaty on Non-Proliferation and the relatively new, just not even 2 years old, treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. They can be seen as complementary. One of the practical political problems is that many of the nuclear states depict the new treaty, and certainly, of course, the nuclear states also being members of NATO, depict the 50-year-old treaty as being the only way to go, and the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons to be an imposter or to be a threat to international order, because the focus is on ultimately prohibition. And that really is not a rational argument, but it is certainly an argument that's being used.
Mm. Right. Well, I've heard it before, but I guess you heard it more there. Is that were there countries there represented who were opposing the treaty? And if I think some countries went as observers. Canada, I believe, did not even officially have an observer role, but the observers didn't speak, I presume. Or in what way were their opinions made apparent?
Not really. I would say in bilateral meetings, side meetings, discussions that were taking place, but in the end, the Kingdom of the Netherlands and Norway and Germany all sent observer delegations, and they are all members of NATO. It was a very disappointing time to be a Canadian at that conference, and it's not the first time that I've been a Canadian parliamentarian at international conferences that deal with the threat of nuclear weapons, and seen how the current leadership of Canada, it didn't used to be that way. Current leadership of Canada is very much silenced, essentially, by their understanding of what NATO demands of them.
Yeah. Sam, you raised your hand. You don't have to raise your hand. Just blurt out what's on your mind.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mary Lou. I do a lot of work with various groups across Africa, and African states are frequently being courted to be fellow travelers, sister travelers with either the West or China or whatever. Is there any involvement by parliamentarians from there so that they can eventually have a kind of independent view without viewing their position on these things just as a bargaining chip between China, Russia, and the US?
Yes, there were African parliamentarians in Vienna at the UN. There were actually 3 conferences that occurred in 1 week in Vienna, which is why they called it the Nuclear Ban Week. And there was some African representation, but it was more the representation, both parliamentary and also very strong civil society, was not so much from Africa. It really was from Asia and from coastal countries. The Marshall Islands being one of the strongest examples, were very powerful presentations, and also Kazakhstan. Because, of course, they've all experienced nuclear weapons, and they also have rejected nuclear weapons on their land. And a lot of the side events, the panel discussions that occurred, were very much on the theme of the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. And from the Marshall Islands, for example, it was just this very compelling panel that was different generations who had a range of experiences with the nuclear presence in the Marshall Islands and the ocean around. And young people speaking, middle-aged people speaking, older people speaking. I would say that was the strongest regional representation that I experienced during that week.
Thank you.
Okay, fine. Now, I didn't I didn't give us a chance to do what we usually do, which is sort of everybody say what's on your mind. And Mary Lou, why don't you start off by saying, if you were organizing a conversation today, what would you like us to talk about?
Well, I mean, actually, what we're already talking about is very much on my mind. I mean, when we read the current news about the shelling of the nuclear facility in Ukraine and the incredible risk that this is presenting, we come to understand that a discussion about nuclear weapons can't be limited to those weapons of mass destruction. A discussion of nuclear has to include nuclear facilities. Absolutely. And the weaponization, the potential weaponization of those facilities. I also just, I'm sure everyone has some familiarity with the Pugwash Institute. And, you know, we're really talking about a Canadian-based international organization that was recognized with the Nobel Prize in the 1990s. And the founding of the Pugwash Institute came out of the what's called the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. Mm-hmm. It was back in the 1950s, reflecting on the future of the world and the existence of nuclear weapons, obviously as a result of what we've already recognized today in the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the fact that we have this international institute, the fact that on the civil society and on the science side, something that Meta, you know a lot about, is to me a source of great pride. I just don't know how widely known it is. And one of my goals, because I have a focus on youth engagement in my work as a senator, is to really find ways to increase the youth engagement. There is youth engagement in the Pugwash Institute annually, but to grow this and to grow a much wider Canadian understanding of this remarkable institution.
Well, as a longtime member of Pugwash, I heartily endorse whatever you're planning to do. Let's work together on this.
Yeah.
Sam, your turn.
I want to add a comment there. Yeah. Sort of my concerns around nuclear writ large are two. One, and they have to do with mining and disposal. The mining for yellow cake in India is an environmental disaster of the first order. I mean, it's destroying villages and agriculture.
I'm sorry, in India, I didn't even know they were mining uranium in India.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Where in India?
I'll have to look it up, but it's a problem. I'll look it up.
Okay, good.
And the other, of course, is we haven't followed Schumacher's advice, which is the nice thing about radioactive material is that the gods spread it in remote locations in diluted quantities, and we're foolish enough to be digging it up and concentrating it, and we'll be stuck with the concentrate forever. The waste disposal issue, which is problematic at every turn. Mm-hmm. In fact, some of the problems in the Ukraine, one of the problems is that some of those buildings are full of waste. And so you don't even have to hit a reactor, you just have to hit a waste disposal building and you're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I think the remarkable irony about this war is that it's it's strengthening the positions on both sides. That is because Russia has, is in control of Europe's energy, basically. The Europeans are having to rethink, do we really need to shut down these nuclear power plants that we were going to cut down? Or maybe we should restart our coal or whatever. So there's an argument again for keeping nuclear power. At the same time, the very fact that this Zaporizhzhia plant, the largest one in Europe, is under attack and could blow up and kill everybody in Europe practically, is certainly a convincing argument for why we want to get rid of nuclear. I'd be interested in knowing the overall general impact of the war and these developments on public opinion with regard to nuclear power. And I wonder if anybody has, any pollsters can even answer that question yet.
I just want to talk about the war, which can be prevented. The Russian aggression could be prevented by the democratic countries. The developments of this dramatic developments inside the Russian society can be seen since at least since the first aggression. Yesterday it was the date, the 8th of August. It was the first aggression of Russia against Georgia. And which this aggression hasn't been responded by the democratic countries, and it was quite consensual opinion that it's better to have Russia as friend. Don't react to Russia's aggressions. And the first account about the aggression against Georgia was performed as some balanced blame on Russia and on Georgia, and even on Georgia more than on Russia. Later, it was published another investigation, another research that showed that indeed Russia was the perpetrator, was an initiator of this aggression. As a result, Georgia has lost the war. The hope was that Russia will finally come to the democracy, and that the children that used to live, the children of Russia's elite, who used to live and study in democratic countries, will bring the democratic values to Russia. It didn't happen. And, they used and continue to promote the most aggressive and the most conservative values that is depicted as traditional values. In fact, in Russia today, dominates the combination of the neoconservatism and neoliberalism.
At the core of this is something that I treated as very personal to me, but I think it's really a pandemic, and that's that as sophisticated as we have become, we really don't understand how people come to have an image of who they are as individuals and how they fit out there. And I say out there, I don't even want to say in society, because I know people whose complete existence consists of a credit card in one hand and a cell phone in the other hand. And they go, I can get what I want when I want it. What more could I ask for? And then we try to get them to get engaged in something. And engagement is only with Fed Express or DHL waiting for the package to arrive, as far as they're concerned. And we just don't understand. I mean, sort of the politics around women's autonomy in their bodies, the politics around, I mean, you know, I have Americans describing Canada as a socialist country. And they haven't got a clue as to what socialism is. It's just they're out there with a bucket full of tar and feathers, and they're putting tar and feathers on anything that they don't like. And we don't really understand how they came to not like it.
Well, what I don't understand is what went on in 1917, because I am now reading, I'm almost half through Adam Hochschild's new book, which isn't out yet. He sent me a proof of it so I can read it before it's published. But it's called American Midnight. And it's about a period of American history that had been forgotten. That is, the United States entered the World War I in 1917. And he starts off with a description of Woodrow Wilson and his thinking and the psychological attitudes of the American population at that point. They became truly, but he does not use the word, but you just use the word fascist. I would say in 1917, American public opinion was fascist. Having read it's a huge book. He's got too many things in it from my point of view. I don't want to read it all, but because it's so convincing. The amount of lynchings and tar and featherings and people losing their jobs and people being, awful things happening to anybody who questioned the war or who seemed to have any friendly feelings toward Germans, for example. Anybody who, for example, if you had somebody hired a German to teach them how to drive, and they were, pilloried for having hired a German, immigrant to the U.S. to teach them driving and so on. It goes on and on and on with examples of truly fascist behavior. Now, it's happening now in not only Russia, Dina, but it's happening in, you talk about Hungary. The other day, if you listen to what's his face, the Orban said, he's that's fascist. So
it's happening.
And the U.S. might reelect Trump. Who knows? Now that he's got this new grievance that the FBI didn't treat him the way he wanted to be treated, they might line up and vote for him. I don't know. So that's the problem. How do you explain that kind of mentality? I don't know, but it's not just Russia.
No, well, for me, since I'm a dual national, I watch states in the U.S. saying we're going to pass a law where citizens can act like the Stasi in East Germany and report on a neighbor that they think went out of town because she had a miscarriage or bought some birth control pills or whatever, and the doctor can go to jail. They can be fined phenomenal amounts of money, and the person who turns them in gets a prize. And you're going, what kind of reality is this?
If somebody can explain it, that's a question I've been asking for so long. It's almost boring to me to ask it again. Mary Lou, do you have a theory? What's the matter with the world?
Often in this time, we tend to attribute a lot to the influence of social media, and I think we should. I think, though, that we've been talking about earlier times when social media didn't exist. I watched the decline of democracy in so many parts of the world, including Canada, and it feels like a wave. It feels like a pattern, a big, over long-term repeating pattern, and I honestly don't know, and I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but it's a new discovery for me. I did not know this until I read a couple of days ago. I watched a video by a guy named Cripps, an Australian guy who's written about global, the end of the world kinds of issues, and he points out that although intelligence scores globally had been increasing since 1975,
they've been decreasing at the rate of something like 3 points per decade. So that there's been a decline in at least the industrial societies that have been measuring it in Europe. There's been a decline of 15 points of IQ since 1975. Now, that is a huge decline. And that has to, I did not know this. Did you, either of you, or any of you, have any idea that has been going on and that we have to actually worry about it? The question is, of course, why is it happening? It's probably environmental, but nobody knows. Do you know this?
I have some comments there. There are a bunch of issues that have to do with measurement. Intelligence is a polyfactored aspect of mind, and even things like the changing nature of the culture in terms of what people remember and get rewarded for and so forth. That may have an impact. There may be something real there that's actually falling. I don't know. I mean, they're getting the same problem apparently with males in much of the Western world, with their sperm count going down. At least there we can measure it, and it's an unambiguous measurement. We don't know the causes, but on intelligence, I would really have to be very careful about how I interpreted that stuff.
Well, apparently it takes place even within families. So it isn't that you might have inferred or guessed that it's that unintelligent families are having larger numbers of children than well-educated or intelligent parents, and that therefore the distribution would change. But that's not the case. In fact, intelligent parents are having as many or more kids as less so, and even their children are having a decline in intelligence. So what is it? I just plain don't know. And I don't know whether it's relevant, because as Mary Lou pointed out, and I've just been pointing out, we had the same stupid social values in 1917 for 4 years, apparently, during the Wilson administration. And he's not anybody to be very proud of, I tell you. But so it has to be environmental or social in some way. It can't be genetic, I don't think.
It's unlikely to be genetic. It's got, I would put genetics as the least likely cause.
Yeah, but then does it have any explanatory value when it comes to accounting for this trend toward right-wing craziness?
I don't think it has an explanatory value. I think back to the fact that sort of communities and villages and places with low levels of what we would think of as sophistication, education, and literacy sort of lived happily with each other frequently for generations. They didn't have to have a master's degree in behavioral psychology to be decent to each other. They somehow understood notions of decency and integrity and respect for others, stuff that we seem to have lost in the last 100 years.
Mm.
The discussion where they go, well, it's us and them. And I'm not sure who the us is, but I know who the them are. How do you get people engaged in the processes that build both the policies and the culture and the behavior of the internet? How do you get them to be engaged?
Is that hard? I wouldn't have thought that's hard at all. Everybody's constantly complaining about.
Oh yeah, they'll complain, right? But it's like living in a village, in a traditional village, and being somebody who complains and complains and complains, but never turns up for the village meetings.
Well, okay, I'm willing to go. You tell me what I can do at a village meeting about these guys who constantly call me up and lie to me and try to steal from me on the phone and on my internet. What do you do about that? There is no defense against these guys. That's the problem. There is no technological answer for that. You guys, the people inventing the internet just didn't think about the defensive part. It's offense is a lot easier than defense.
Well, we didn't realize how nasty people could be if they were hiding behind a curtain and couldn't be seen. There's an awful. This is not the time to go through. There's an awful lot of discussion at the policy, process, practice, and behavioral level for all the stakeholder groups about how we could do these things a whole lot better, and why we're not doing them a whole lot better, and what we should be doing in terms of trying to educate people. I mean, one of the problems we're having with the internet almost globally is that almost no advanced anybody now teaches governance. There are no civics courses. And you ask people about government, and all they'll do is give you a list of complaints.
I want to build on the earlier comments and look at what is actually the incentivization that particularly young people have in terms of their access to knowledge. And it's absolutely correct to note the decline in curricula, that required curricula around civic governance and civic participation. I have a bill, and I also have a member of parliament with his bill. We're working together on the lowering of the federal voting age in Canada to 16. And I am meeting astonishing young people, coast to coast to coast in this country. And they don't fit the stereotype of what we have been talking about, the kind of people that we've been talking about. But I know from talking to these young people, many of whom are working as part of our national campaign to lower the federal voting age to 16, that the incentivization in their lives in terms of options, there's so much that is automatically a celebration of one kind of violence or another. Not necessarily physical violence, but the spectrum of violence. And of course, we know about video games. Of course, we know about popular media programs, cable programs. But if you think about
Mary Lou, we know about that, but there's a lot of controversy about that. I would say of the people that I run into, without a systematic poll or anything, most of the people I know would discount the idea that access to video games or exposure to violent films or that sort of thing has any impact.
And I disagree, respectfully disagree.
You run across people who do understand it?
I think there's been an appetite now for decades that a massive exposure of what is essentially a massive celebration of violent leadership, a celebration of characters in movies and films. Now, there are exceptions. Of course, there are exceptions. But what I'm trying to say here is that there's a normalization of violence and a conflation of what a leader, what a hero is, what a leader is using violence. And some of the very best productions, whether they are animated or whether they are acted by humans, are really celebrations of violence, and where solutions are violence. And and in contrast to that, we have some amazing examples of online curricula that's focused on young people learning how to problem solve, young people learning how to recognize when somebody in a class discussion, for example, is being excluded, to understand some of the patterns of gender-based behavior, how typical it is for boys to speak up and to overtalk girls, et cetera, et cetera. And what I'm trying to say here is that the rewards, by and large, the rewards and the celebration, the themes of celebration that are happening way more often are a celebration of kinds of violence and kinds of dominance.
Mm-hmm. You know,
And-
I hope you don't think I disagreed with you. I agree with you. What I'm saying is that not everybody knows that. There are a lot of people who will excuse it and say it doesn't make any difference. And
Well, I don't think
that-
the research, I actually think the research does not support that. So they may have that opinion, but the other part
I
of this
agree.
is,
I agree with you. But the problem is people don't seem to realize that it does have a harmful effect. That
Yes,
people
and-
don't know enough about this impact. And they'll
agreed.
Right.
The other point I
ahead.
wanted to make was about activism and the number of young activists, dedicated, sophisticated young activists. When I raise nuclear weapons with them, no, where their activism is basically in their community of concern. Now, it might be an online community, but it's in their community of concern. And I've actually had some of the activists for whom I have enormous respect say to me, it's too big. I can't, the end of the world is too big to take on as an activist, you know? And that may sound like irrational, but I believe them when they say that it's so much easier where you have what seems to be achievable. And that's part of why I mentioned Pugwash at the beginning, that it as it happened, of course, it was all men. And we don't see that now. We see many more women participating, and certainly many more young women and girls. But you know, one of the things that we do have largely missing right now on the question of the end of the world and nuclear weapons is the counter voices, the kind of leadership. And I mean, I consider the absence of Canada, complete absence of Canada, at the UN first meeting of states parties to the newest treaty to be highly indicative of this. That we couldn't even exercise leadership by showing up.
Yeah.
And so for young people, what are they seeing? What are they seeing in their leadership? Well, for the most part, they're not seeing very strong, bold leadership that is values-based in terms of the biggest threats to our world.
Dina, tell us about the kids you teach, of the university students.
I want to mention that probably the next year and the next few months, the number of anti-nuclear activists will increase, because the last years, the young people didn't feel that the nuclear war is maybe unleashed. Today, much more people do believe that it's possible. So it became the problem. As for the curriculum, it's interesting that till recent in Russia, there were a wide range of schooling and wide range of schools that and curriculums haven't been controlled, and it appeared that among the young people who studied the recent 20 years, the number of people who do not support the war, who are ready to protest, are much higher than among the people who studied, who are in age now, who are 50 plus. And what is interesting, that probably the curricula can influence the people, and it gives some hope for the developments in Russia.
Mary Lou, you're in touch with young people. Dina, you're in touch with young people. I'm not. But Dina, you also can contact young people in Russia. I would like to have a Zoom conversation among a young, let's say 2 young Israelis, 2 young Russians, and 2 young Canadians, about the same age, let's say 20 years old, about the war and nuclear weapons and all of these threats. Could we organize such a thing?
To find the young people, yes, we can try.
Let's do it. You find me some young people, and Mary Lou?
I'm afraid that the people who are now in Russia, maybe the people who, I know many young people in their 20s who immigrated to Georgia, to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Israel, and so on, Czechia, and so on, and then can express themselves freely. I'm not sure that people who are living in Russia.
Well, listen. Every month I have a global town hall the last Sunday of every month, and there's a young Russian. Well, he's not so young; he must be in his 30s, but he's a translator, an interpreter, and he is very bold. He comes on every time, and he speaks, half an hour or so each time, answering questions and so on. He has a network of friends. I bet you if you can't find anybody who would do it, he would, because he knows people who are willing to take a chance of going on Zoom and getting, he could get in trouble, but he says he's not afraid of them. He says he doesn't think they're smart enough to even bother to find him. So I don't know. But if we get, Mary Lou, if you get a boy and a girl, a male and a female student, about 20, and I'll see if I can find somebody through him in Russia, and you get 2 Israelis, a male and a female, let's have 6 people conversation.
Absolutely.
There's no problem to get to Israelis. I am afraid that in Russia, people are limited in their expressions, and even those who don't support the war will refuse to speak. When people are called to make by sociologists that make surveys, about 60% refuse to speak with them.
Mhm.
They perceive these people as agents of power, as agents of Putin.
Yeah.
So it's.
I hear you, Mary Lou. What is it?
Thank you. I need to say goodbye. I spend part of every day and a lot of nights working on trying to get Afghans still to safety. And we're right in the midst of an evacuation today. And I just had a message. I have to sign off and say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All
it was
right.
a pleasure to be with you. Thank
We'll
you
be
for the
back in touch.
invitation.
Uh,
Okay.
Good wishes. Thank you. Okay.
Bye. So probably it's possible to find these people, but I'm not sure that they can speak without the consequences.
Yeah, let me comment on that. Maybe even you do this matter. There's a lot of communication back and forth between Russians using virtual private networks and encrypted sending, but that's kept fairly private, extremely private. It's hard for anybody to crack it. But if you say anything publicly now, it not only does it get recorded, it can be analyzed. And the bots can just look at everything, and you use one word and it tags you to be looked at a little more closely. So I would be very reluctant if I were a young Russian at this point to say anything that got recorded. Period. It just
Yes, you're right. But probably the immigrants, immigrants to Georgia, I can't find.
Georgia,
In Georgia and Lithuania, it can be found. In Russia, I would be very cautious. I'm not sure that it's good.
When Mary Lou was talking about lowering the voting age all the way down to 16, as I understand it, and from my reading, we basically reinvented the notion of young people between the late 1800s and now. We turned them into adolescents, post-adolescents, teenagers. We turned them into consumers and people who are seduced by influencers. The two things that I always go back to is I remember that Benjamin Franklin was a ship's captain at the age of 12. And that my father, at the age of 13 or 12, actually had to drop out of grade school to take over the family farm, which was a brand new family farm, because his father had died. He had to be a full-time family farmer at the age of 12 with a grade 3 education. And he did it. I mean, people rose to the occasion. Ordinary people rose to the occasion because that's what life was like. And now we've said, you don't have to become an adult until you're 40 or 50.
Sam, let me disagree with you. As of 3 weeks ago, I had a brilliant new idea. I wanted to start a citizens assembly for university undergraduates around the world. And I had it all figured out how I was going to do it. I figured out all the mathematics of how to sample and how to reach people. And I had a list of email addresses and so on. And when I talk to people who teach at the university level now, of course, I haven't taught students for several years now. It's been about 5 years since I was 3 anyway, since I was teaching at all. And that was just one course at a time. But the people that I know who are teaching at the undergraduates in Canada today say that it would not work, that these young people will not perform, and they've got their own activities they're going to do. They've got their lifestyle. They've got their own concerns, but they would not be good at this kind of thing. That's very concerning to me, because I really liked the idea for at least 2 weeks, and then I was persuaded that it was not a workable plan.
Well, here's my view there, and it goes back to the point earlier about trying to mobilize young people around anything at this point in time. And those that do mobilize are usually single interests. It's the one thing they're interested in, and that they can't deal with the end of the world. First of all, it's not the end of the world. It's just the end of humans on the world. The rest of the animals will get along fine. But we've
extinguished most of them too. So, and the plants too.
Okay, so it'll just be the cockroaches and the rats.
Right.
But years ago, I was invited to give a talk to the Canadian Debaters annual competition, and it was a pre-dinner talk. So I'm with about 60 of the best university debaters in the country. They're all hell-bent on becoming lawyers. So I give a talk on how paralegals and the internet and digital services are going to eat into the traditional things that lawyers do. Their response was to throw their bread buns at me from their tables. They were just throwing the buns at me because they disagreed with me. But by the time we got to dessert, they were saying, yeah, well, we'd like to do things in the world. We just don't understand how to do it. We haven't been taught anything in these areas. They were all telling me they were going to retire at 35 and move to a Caribbean island. And then at the end, they were talking about, well, how do we get our hands on these things? Where do we start? I think there's a vacuum in the education around governance and civil society and a whole bunch of topics that just leaves them lost. And now it leaves them lost. It leaves them quite susceptible for all these gimmicks to suck them in to become a consumer of fast fashion and to have opinions that are just throwaway opinions. We've kind of backed ourselves into this, but I don't think we're irrevocably there.
Dina, what's the situation with the students you teach? I presume you teach undergraduate Israeli kids.
Yes, I have to estimate to stress that Israeli students are at least 2-3 years elder than the kids in undergraduate students in the United States. Almost all of them are after the army.
After military service.
Are after the military service, and sometimes even they are 22, sometimes 23. So they probably a little bit mature than the kids in other states. They have quite tremendous indoctrination in the army. And, unfortunately, we can indicate the recent year, we can indicate some twist to the right. People who it doesn't necessarily that they explode the conservative values, but all the so-called security questions, they used to support the traditional Israeli approach. And it's some deadlock in the development, the possible development in the way of a democratic and society. So the last military operation actually were supported by the majority of population, even by those who used to describe themselves as socialists and socially oriented, as about Zionists. The Zionist indoctrination and Zionist plus military indoctrination is very significant in Israeli society. So they can be very peculiar and very smart in all questions concerning the others and the values in general. But as for the supporting the military actions of Israeli governments, they quite supportive and quite militaristically oriented.
Thank you all. And I'm going to try to put together some people from Canada, from Israel, young people, and let's get some expatriates, kids, young people from Russia as well, and see what it looks like. Shall we? Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Get fine. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye.
madam. Have a nice day.
Bye. Bye, Dina. Nice to have met you. Bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode 487. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, which is tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, even post the transcripts there. When you get there, look around. We have conversations there about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar or the name of one of the guest speakers. And after you've watched, scroll down and share your own thoughts about the show. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through Press Reader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click.